Welcome to LeanVerse, where lean thinking meets modern life. I'm your host, Bernadette Hill, and I'm joined by my co-host, Tatiana Sell. We're two Lean Six Sigma black belts who spent our careers helping people and organizations simplify, improve, and thrive. Our goal at LeanVerse is to ignite the desire for transformation and provide the tools to turn intention into action. Hi, welcome to LeanVerse, the new podcast where we explore lean thinking in modern life. My name is Bernadette Hill, and I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt and a continuous improvement professional.
Hi everyone, I'm Tatiana Sell, co-host of the LeanVerse with Bernadette Hill. I'm a business operations and continuous improvement leader.
And together we geek out about all things lean.
Geek out on Lean Six Sigma methodology.
I am joined by my co-host, Tatiana Sell.
Let's dig in.
Before we begin, a quick note. If this podcast helps you see systems more clearly, subscribing, rating, or sharing it genuinely helps others find these conversations. Lean thinking spreads through visibility. So if you found value here, that small action alone helps more people encounter ideas that might improve how they work and live. Now let's continue our flow versus friction series. In the first two episodes, we explored defects, overprocessing, overproduction, and inventory, forms of waste that show up in processes and compound quietly. Today, we shift into something more human, waiting and non-utilized talent. These wastes aren't just about inefficiency. They're about time lost and capability constrained and value that exists but can't reach the people who need it. Because sometimes the friction isn't caused by too much work. It's caused by work that's stuck or talent that's trapped inside a system that doesn't know how to use it well.
Hey Bernadette and hey listeners, we're back. How are you doing, Bernadette?
Awesome, Tatiana. I'm excited for episode 3 of this series.
All right. So as you remember, in the past 2 episodes, we covered defects, overprocessing, overproduction, and inventory. And today, we are shifting to a new pair, a pair that feels different, but it's just as costly. We're going to talk about, drumroll, waiting and non-utilized talent.
Thank you. Waiting for me is, of the 8 wastes, is my personal worst waste. It's because I'm so impatient. I hate waiting completely. So I'm happy to share my story today on waiting. But before we do that, one interesting detail about this pair is that non-utilized talent was actually not part of the original 7 wastes that Toyota Production System identified back in the 1950s. It was added later as Lean expanded beyond manufacturing into broader organizational contexts. Around the 1990s is when we added non-utilized talent as the 8th waste. And this waste highlights when organizations fail to use people's skills, creativity, and capability.
Because this pair is just not about process inefficiency. It's about time loss, capability ignored, and people waiting while value is trapped. So let's get into it. Tell me your story, Bernadette.
Thank you for asking. Well, today my story is going to sound pretty familiar to most people. I wanted to share a story about, sitting in a waiting room for a doctor's appointment, something I'm sure every listener has had to endure at some point in their life, right? Now, in this particular case, this appointment was not for me. It was for my daughter, who she started wearing glasses when she was really young. And at this point, we'd already been seeing her brilliant optometrist for a couple years. He's brilliant. He was incredible with kids. And he really helped us align her vision when she was really young. She had kind of, it was misaligned. So he helped us really align it when she was really young. And helped us really understand how to get a 4-year-old to wear her glasses, which was another challenge in its own, right? Right. I know. I just started wearing these later in life, but yeah, it's a challenge. So, he was such a great, or he is such a great doctor, and really helped make what could have been stressful visits a little bit easier because he helped us understand our daughter's needs. But because he was such an excellent doctor, his practice was super busy. It was always just packed. He was in high demand, and appointment days were really brutal. Every visit turned into a 3+ hour event. And by the time my daughter was seen, We were already exhausted. She was cranky. And then whatever patience we had going into the visit was long gone by the time we were done. And after the first really hard visit, I did check in. I talked with the front desk staff and asked, hey, could we schedule future appointments in the morning? Because what I thought we were, experiencing was sort of that end of the day, domino effect that happens when every appointment just gets slightly later. And by the time you get to the end, you're seeing patients an hour and a half past the original date, right? Or past the original time. And so I asked, can we be scheduled earlier in the day? And I found out that their regular practice was always about scheduling kids at the end of the day because they needed to be dilated. And so they wouldn't, in dilation, as you know, because you're a glasses wearer, impacts your vision for a long period of time, several hours. And so they like to schedule the kids at the end of the day. So I accepted that. And after a particularly hard 2-hour wait, I went and asked the front desk staff when we were going to be seen. And she kind of had these big owl eyes.
Dilated too.
Let me know. Unfortunately, Miss Hill, there's been a mistake, or Mrs. Hill, there's been a mistake. We didn't call her back yet to dilate her. So we're going to have to wait some more. And that moment was really rough. I already said, I don't love waiting. My daughter is young. And also kind of another thing about me personally and professionally, I notice, right? Because I know what to look for whenever I'm out in the real world. I notice when I'm in the grocery store waiting a long period of time. I notice when I'm waiting for food at a restaurant. I notice when things seem a little bit chaotic around me, right, in terms of the process. And so I couldn't help noticing that the system wasn't working. Multiple times we're there late. Multiple times we're there for multi-hour visits. So, even at that point, I realized that the visits without dilations weren't much better. We were just constantly sitting waiting. But this time it was particularly egregious, Tatiana. But what stood out to me over time wasn't just the waiting. It was that nobody seemed to fix it.
As you were living all of this, did you feel that anyone in the clinic, anyone in the middle, kind of owning the process felt, oh, we need to do something about it? Or it was something that everyone just silently accepted?
From every individual in the waiting room to us, to the front desk staff and to the clinicians that we saw eventually, it just felt like status quo. This is it was accepted as just the way that our operation works. And, and again, he's a brilliant doctor. So I can imagine patients just thinking like, well, this is just our regular experience. That we definitely felt that way. Wasn't happy about it, but that's what it felt like.
Yeah, I can hear you. And I've been part of the acceptance as well. So I understand where people were coming from. But okay, time for definitions. I love this story. Thank you for sharing. Now let's define the two ways that showed up. We talked about waiting, and let's start with this. So waiting through a classical lean definition, it is any time where people, work, or information, they are just unable to move forward without getting stuck in the process.
Right. So where that waiting showed up in the optometrist office was extended delays with no clear signal of progress. Patients were waiting long stretches without knowing what would happen next. And then, what we recognized was care was technically available. It just wasn't flowing. And then the experience wasn't just slow, it was uncertain. And that uncertainty is often what makes waiting feel even worse and heavier than you would normally feel. I hate waiting, especially when I don't know if I'm the next one up. So that showed up there as well.
It's anxiety inducing. I can totally see that. So now let's define the non-utilized talent. Through a lean type of definition, it is a waste that occurs when people's skills, judgment, or even experience, they are constrained by how a process is designed. Can you give us an example, getting back to your story of the non-utilized talent?
Yes. Well, so for what we recognized or what we realized was that the office was full of capable, well-intentioned people. Everybody was nice. Everybody did their particular job very well, but they were part of a system that wasn't necessarily working for the patient, right? And so their expertise couldn't reliably reach us. The care was good once it happened, but the way that the work was structured made it feel really hard for their talent to show up consistently. And it wasn't like anybody appeared careless or incompetent. They didn't. The issue was more about it. The issue wasn't about individual performance. It was more about a system that limited how people could apply what they were capable of.
I just love what you said about no one appeared careless or incompetent. That's what you said. This is fantastic because it's the classical process, not setting people up for success.
Respect
So
for people.
exactly, that was a great point, and thank you for illustrating the description, the definition. Apologies, the definition with this link back to the story. Okay, so definitions, we tackled that. So let's talk about why those two ways they matter. They, I want to say that they don't matter just because they slow things down, Bernadette, but they quietly change behavior, they impact costs, etc., etc. It's all the conversation since we started with the series about how ways they like to hang out with each other, they compound each other. It's the whole thing, but tell me on your experience of why waiting matters for business, generally speaking.
Well, so waiting compounds the process because it creates bottlenecks and slows the entire process. So when people, information, or decisions are stuck, the flow breaks down. And this whole series is about friction and flow. So high friction, low flow rate, right? Resources are sitting idle instead of adding value, and that drives up cost. And when the system finally moves again, work often gets rushed to catch back up. And so maybe then you introduce quality issues, increasing the risk of defects, like we talked about in our first episode in the series.
Yeah, there we go. So about non-utilized talent. So let's layer that and why it matters. So well, when people's skills and experience they aren't fully used, time gets spent just reacting to problems instead of solving root causes. That's yikes. Also, teams they miss ideas, improvement, innovation over time. Guess what? People disengage and eventually they leave or they mentally check out. Do you agree?
I totally agree. These two ways reinforce each other. Waiting creates frustration and firefighting because we're going to be, somebody's going to be frustrated they're waiting, and now we're firefighting because we're not figuring out the root cause. We're just throwing spaghetti at the wall, trying to put band-aids on the situation. Non-utilized talent ensures that the same problems keep coming back because people don't feel safe or aren't asked to speak up about how they feel they could solve the problem. They may not even know that they have the power to solve the problem, even if they have the ideas to do so. So those are two of the ways that they can definitely compound and impact each other.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. Well, Bernadette, as we've done in the other episodes, we're not going to talk about tools on how identify waste, but here we're going to just share with our listeners a little bit of the many ways that we can start reducing waiting and non-utilized talent, just to spark a few ideas. I'm going to start first with waiting. Reducing waiting begins by identifying where the work gets stuck and why. Bottlenecks are often visible if you look for where people or information pauses. Also, standardized work and automation, they can reduce variability that creates those delays, and improving communication between teams helps a lot to, allow the work to move instead of sitting idle.
And now let's talk about non-utilized talent. One simple shift is just to ask people, what are they capable of, right? Not just letting their current role dictate how they add value to the organization. Make improvements part of everybody's job or part of everybody's work, not something that some special team has to do or that gets done at a certain time or frequency, right? It's just part of your everyday work. That's Kaizen, right? That daily continuous improvement. And then create room for people to grow into their potential instead of locking them into narrow tasks that underutilize their skills.
That's a good one. Great points. But Bernadette, it's time for a recap and reflection.
And this recap is going to be powerful, Tatiana, because it's pretty simple. When work is stuck, look for waiting. When ideas are stuck, look for non-utilized talent.
So, okay, let's see if I can bring a reflection that it's as powerful as your recap. Here's the reflection for this week. Where might ego, ownership, or turf protection be limiting how people contribute and quietly turning talent into waste? Sometimes, as we mentioned, constraint isn't a skill, capacity, or even headcount. Sometimes the real bottleneck is who gets to speak, decide, or improve. Sit with that one and see you folks in the next episode.
Another excellent reflection, Tatiana. We'll see you next week for when we talk about motion and transportation waste.
Yay!
See you next time on the LeanVerse.
See you.
Waste is rarely a capacity problem, just like non-utilized talent is rarely a skill problem. More often, it's a system design problem. When work is stuck, it doesn't always mean there aren't enough people. When talent isn't showing up, it doesn't always mean capability is missing. It often means the system isn't structured in a way that allows flow. In our final chapter of the Flow versus Friction series, we'll explore motion and transportation wastes and how unnecessary movement compounds the friction we've already uncovered. If this episode sharpened how you see systems, consider subscribing or following LeanVerse on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. And if you're listening on Apple, a rating or review helps more people discover this content. If these conversations have been useful to you, sharing them helps others find them too. And if you'd like to go deeper, the Lean Mastery Makerspace is now live inside the Savage Simplicity ecosystem. It's a free space for people who want to practice lean thinking beyond the tools, to see systems clearly, reduce friction intentionally, and create the conditions where talent can actually flow. You can explore it at savagesimplicityecosystem.circle.so. Because life is hard, why not make it simpler? LeanVerse is hosted by Bernadette Hill and Tatiana Sell. All episodes are programmed and written by Tatiana Sell and produced and edited by Bernadette Hill.